Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now.
iOS versus Android. Yes, I'm going there. And yes, I realize what can of worms I'm opening. But I'm wanting to do it intentionally. I mean, no, not to stir the pot. If only to explain, once again, that neither one of these products, neither one of these platforms is inherently better than the other. And I don't want to confuse products with platform, if only because the market strategies around either platform is completely different. Apple's versus Google's. So remember, before I go on, before you comment, better, as I've said before, is relative. And I've written this down to make sure I make this point. There is no overarching winner or leader. It all depends on what you're measuring and what you value. A strategy's strength is also very often its weakness in comparison to an opposite system. And this is the one thing that is very frequently lacking in a lot of the quote-unquote conversations that happen when we have these platform wars, these religious wars, these holy wars of which OS is better and which device is better, and there's no clear answer. There is a very clear answer, though. Which device is better for you? Which platform is better for somebody else? There's no one answer. And I think we can have, or I'd like to believe we can have, a cogent conversation of why it's so very nice to have two very competitive players in this space. Competition is necessary to keep platforms growing, to keep features accelerating, to have good experiences. Because if there was just one that existed, what do you think would happen with that one product? Sure, the altruistic side of me says it's always going to improve and always going to get better. But if you're not really fighting to win in a race that never ends, you're just going to stop running. So more than anything, again, before I dive into a few of the points that I did want to make in trying to talk about iOS versus Android and do it the best I possibly can, you need to understand that today, iOS and the stock version of Android, fantastic options, which makes it incredibly difficult for consumers to decide. Both have rich ecosystems of applications, of media, features, and they're in many ways the same, but they're also very different. And this, more than anything, is what makes it impossible to do comparisons. You're better off comparing one iOS device against another iOS device or one Android device against another Android device, because comparing these two devices is a bit disingenuous. I'm still trying my best to talk about the platform differences more than anything, but the reason why is because Apple, and I think we all know this, has a completely different strategy than Google. Apple says iOS is what iOS is and what Apple makes iOS. Google says Android's open and you can do what you want with it because we want you using Android because we make our money through advertising and selling user data and services. Apple makes its money with hardware. So, of course, iPhones are going to possibly be more expensive than an Android device. Possibly, because it depends on which iOS device that you're buying. Remember, you can get a free iOS device if you sign up for a contract. Of course, they've been giving away Android phones for a number of years for much the same reason, if only to proliferate the market. So, Apple makes money with hardware, and yes, through selling applications and media. Google sells media and applications, but it makes most of its money through advertising and getting your data out of you and into Google's world. Two completely different market strategies, two completely different ways of approaching the same marketplace. And they're both doing a good job, but doing a good job in different ways. All right, so interoperability with other products. Apple creates iOS and makes it interoperable with OS X or other iOS products. You know that they control the experience. So you buy into this, you're buying into a family of experiences. It's not just this single iOS device. It's that iOS device as it lives amongst your other iOS devices or Apple products. That's the experience Apple is creating, by and large, for the consumer. Android, on the other hand, well, anybody can make an Android device, truly. Anybody could make an Android-compatible device, truly. There are a lot of options out there. That's the benefit. There are a lot of options, a lot of choices. The community is going to decide which one is going to rule the roost, because ultimately there's going to be a leading Android phone, and that seems to change almost like every other month, which is good because, hey, I mean, we've got some kind of an addiction to various devices, but it's also frustrating because there's always something new coming out, and which one's going to interoperate with that one, and if I buy this Android phone and have a great experience, that doesn't mean that I'm going to buy another Android phone and have a great experience, because one implementation of Android is almost completely different from another implementation of Android. That's good, but it's also bad. Can you see, like, the ups and downs there? It's not just across the board good, and it's not just across the board bad. Apple's got the full family of products to complement. Google is starting to go that direction. Of course, in this video, if you haven't already figured this out, I'm holding on to a Nexus device, which I have said is, or has been, the best Android experience I've ever had, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video, if only to say, hey, dude, they're both doing really well, but just in different ways. I have some interoperability with other Google products and services. There are some open standards coming down the pike. I haven't had, an extreme amount of usage with those other devices, other than sneezing a video from my Android phone up onto, well, I guess it's an Android TV, a Google TV. They don't really operate in the same space as Apple. Apple's got all these consumer products. Google's got a couple of them, but that's not really their bailiwick. In terms of accessory support, this is something that might be interesting for some of you more than others. You can get an untold amount of accessories for your iOS devices. Not so much with Android. Is that a big deal? Well, for some of you, it might be, because you want to have a case that, speaks to your personality. Others may not care as much. They just want a good device. And so if you walk into a store, if you found an accessory for your Android product, it could happen, but there are a lot of Android products out there to match. So you almost have to go with the leading Android product for the day to pretty much be able to find an accessory that you want and or need for it, whether it's a case, a screen protector, or anything that thrives inside an ecosystem that's contingent on some kind of, form. This is a certain shape, which is a completely different shape than somebody else's shape of an Android phone. Not the same with an iOS device. So accessory support is completely different between the two, just like interoperability with other products is completely different between the two. Now, in terms of support, Apple's got stores. Google, not so much. I could buy an iOS device online. I could buy an Android device online. Well, with a Nexus product, I know I'm going directly to Google. If it's another Android product, well, who knows where I'm going to? Am I going to the carrier? Am I going to the hardware manufacturer? Is it a problem with the software? It's the blame game, potentially, with Android. Not so much with iOS. Everybody gets the same experience. So that's a benefit, because everybody gets the same experience, but that's also the drawback, because everybody gets the same experience. Everybody gets a different experience. That's a benefit, but it's also a drawback, because everybody gets a different experience. So when it comes to support, if you say you have an Android product, it may be completely different from someone else's Android product. You have an iOS device, it's like everybody else's. As far as community support, in terms of modification, you've got iOS, which, hey, you get what you get. Apple doesn't like jailbreaking at all. People do it, certainly. Android, on the other hand, well, that's in its nature. It's open. Anybody can do anything they want with it. And so the community, of course, is going to adopt it. All the nerds and geeks love Android for that reason, because they can make it what they want to make it. It's tweakable. And that's really caused the explosive growth of Android, because the nerds and geeks are taking the ball and they're running with it versus living inside a controlled ecosystem, which works for consumers because consumers just want a product that works. But for nerds and geeks, maybe not so much. Maybe they want something that's going to be a bit more tweakable and modifiable from the UI all the way down to the core system features. So speaking of UI, iOS, you got a little bit of modification. Change the wallpaper, some sounds, move icons around, but not really much going on there. People have been very happy with Android in the sense that you can tweak it 7 ways from Sunday. Do you want to tweak it 7 ways from Sunday? Maybe. Do you want an animated wallpaper? Yeah, Android. Do you want a widget? Yeah, Android. You can make it what you want to make it. And that is the strength of Android. Some people just want something to work. And that is a strength, as much as it might be a drawback for some others. Could iOS benefit from animated wallpapers? Well, I don't know if I'd use the word benefit. From widgets, certainly. But then again, an application is kind of like a widget, and you can swipe through things, using multitasking gestures if you wanted to. The advantage of one over the other kind of depends, again, on what you want. As far as the types of users, well, traditionally speaking, Apple has attracted people who've had money. They sell these products at a premium, and they make their money in hardware. I mean, come on, it's a multinational corporation. You're supposed to be profitable, right? That's how Apple drives profit. Google drives profit a completely different way. Same space, different market strategies. Google lets anybody use Android, so you can get cheaper Android products, and sometimes you get what you pay for. Sometimes, not always. So if you are a developer and you're looking to get in front of people who have money, there's a better chance of you getting people to spend money on your product on iOS compared to Android. Kind of. Because people certainly do spend money on both platforms, and every developer has a completely different experience. And it's possibly even then offset by the amount of iOS devices in the market versus the amount of Android devices in the market. Now, some people look at that number while I'm at this point and say, well, clearly Android's better because there are more devices in the market. Well, more doesn't mean better. Are those devices all running the same OS? Are they offering the same user experience to all the users? Not necessarily. In fact, it went without saying to me years ago. I said, okay, yeah, Android is totally going to have more devices in the market. It's open. Anybody can use it. Anybody is using it. There's a glut of Android devices out there. Millions of Android, well, of course, there's millions of more Android devices out there because that's just the nature of the system. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily better. This is a reason, or one of the reasons, we see so many discrepancies between how much money is made in Apple's App Store versus, let's say, the Google Play Marketplace, or why there isn't as wide a mobile web usage on the Android platform compared to iOS. There are large discrepancies, but it's never just one number without looking at that number, relatively speaking, to another number. So you got to keep in mind, there are absolutely going to be a fantastic amount more Android devices out there compared to iOS. It doesn't mean it's better. It doesn't mean it's worse. It's just the nature of the market strategy. As far as, though, the core OS features, iOS is basic. It's had a slow evolution, largely due to not really having a lot of competition. I mean, there was competition, but yeah, gotta tell you, it wasn't really interesting to me until Android 4.2 on this Nexus phone. I was like, wow, this is a really good experience. Apple's got to watch out because it's not just that there are so many more Android products out there now. It's that the stock version of Android is just as compelling as iOS, if not more compelling to some users. Android is replete with solid stock features and is advancing fast. So traditionally speaking, Apple and iOS has all been about fit and finish as much as possible. Of course, that hasn't been perfect. We all know about Siri and some people's experiences with Apple Maps, even though I haven't had as negative experiences as others. Android is getting there. It's getting its story together. It's a cleaner experience than I've seen in, well, ever since I can remember, in as many Android devices that I've tried. Every Android device is a different experience. Even more frustrating to compare iOS to Android. But that stock features, the base of where Android is, as far as Google's concerned, is really catching up to Apple in terms of fit and finish. Some people are intent on comparing keyboards. iOS, you get what you get. Android, you can install a variety of keyboards. I happen to like autocorrect on iOS. I happen to like the way the keyboard feels in my hands on an iOS device. Android, of course, now has a gesture-based keyboard, which I also happen to like. Which one's better than the other? I tell you the truth, sometimes I kind of wish I had a swiping gesture keyboard crossed over with a fantastic autocorrect feature. And so, well, it just depends on what you need more or what you want more. I don't know. Can you find yourself typing faster on one keyboard over the other? Yes, I know you can install another keyboard on Android, which I don't. To me, it's just like, why would I want to install another keyboard? Why wouldn't I just take what they give me and just go with it? Shouldn't that be a good experience out of the box? Keep in mind, a lot of consumers are looking just for that, a good experience out of the box, which is what iOS delivers, as well as stock Android. And I got to be careful about that because I know there are a lot of Android products to talk about, but I'm really doing my best to try to keep this in the realm of this is what Google expects Android to be and what a good Android experience can be against, well, this is what you get with iOS, which is, that's it. The app marketplaces. So Apple controls everything. Google controls when they need to control. The advantage of Apple controlling everything is you're generally not going to get a bad app. It's not going to destroy your phone or your general iOS experience. Google, on the other hand, may give you a bad app. Not because they meant to, it's just it was in the marketplace and you installed it, and now you've got something that has done something that you weren't expecting it to do, even though you may have agreed to the permissions that you accepted when you installed the application. Or maybe it's a disingenuous app in general. So Google has an open door policy. Obviously, that's kind of the whole idea of their openness or open-ishness with Android versus iOS or Apple's strategy. Completely different. And so this may give consumers a better feeling of safety versus this, which may give consumers a feeling of, gosh, I'm still on my own. Google's getting better, and certainly they've shut down apps that have been bad, but it's not about the number of apps in either ecosystem. I got to tell you, I know of hundreds of thousands of applications that are just not worth installing on iOS, and I know probably the same amount on Android. It's not the number of applications. It's about what those applications can do. And really, that's where iOS and Android are in line with one another. So many leading products on one platform are also available for another, typically speaking. But which strategy is better? Closed, completely closed, or open-ish? Just depends on what you value as a consumer. The biggest challenge I think consumers have, and they don't necessarily think about with Android versus iOS beyond cost and hard cost, not just software cost, is the software and hardware congruency. And iOS is in lockstep with its devices, which is the reason Apple can push out updates to previous generations of hardware versus Android being all over the map. And for some users, it's not a big deal. Right? They don't necessarily need the latest updates for their phone. The way the phone shipped, it was just fine. But that's one thing that you're not going to have likely ever with Android is the hardware and software congruency, the software being optimized for the hardware experience that you are absolutely going to have with every iOS device. You are going to have that, however, with Google's hardware in conjunction with Google's software, certainly the software that they're taking charge on, Android. Ease of use, to me, they're just as easy. I mean, one is just as easy as the other one. Really. I mean, iOS is simple, exceedingly simple, but that's how it's kind of easy to use. But Android is getting its story together, and it's becoming just as easy to use, just in a different way. I'm talking again about the experience I've had on the stock Android device here, this Nexus phone from Google. Android's becoming far less complex. iOS, it remains simple. Apple is starting to realize they need to do more because Android works well enough to pull consumers who were previously using or looking at iOS devices away from iOS to Android. And that's good. It's competition. We need it. Now, as far as multitasking is concerned, and this is usually an argumentative point, well, Android's got true multitasking. Some people want that. Other people do not. Android is more like, it's a great platform, but it really, it's more like a traditional computer experience through and through. Even all the way to multitasking, the way the system manages multitasking. To me, I just want a task on whatever's happening here. Like, whatever I'm looking at, that's what I need. I don't want anything else happening, or if it is, I don't want it to take attention away from what's happening. Because I've discovered that when I have fewer things that I can look at on a screen, the more I get done. It makes me happy. I also prefer a smoother experience, and that's generally what iOS has been able to provide users, at the cost of not, quote-unquote, true multitasking. I can switch between apps easily enough on iOS, and I can switch between apps easily enough on Android as well. As far as how those background tasks are managed, if the app is developed properly, coded properly, or well enough for the platform, I don't think there's an advantage or disadvantage of one over the other. Android's getting better at handling multitasking without taking away from what's happening on the, what you see on the screen, compared to iOS, which has generally given the user a smooth, fluid, buttery experience. Google's got the memo, though, and it's certainly getting better enough now where I would say the experiences are coming close to mirroring one another. All right, moving on, and I know that this is not a definitive list. It was just, really a chance for me to do a video talking about why these OS wars are pointless, and how each one has an advantage and a disadvantage, sometimes with the same strategies in comparison to one another. Neither one is better for everything, and consumers need both to spur on the never-ending cycle of competition. The one thing I do want to say before I close is that my choice is irrelevant, just as much as your choice is irrelevant. Because you may throw it out there, but what you choose may not be what somebody else chooses. And your perspective is completely different from someone else's perspective. Once we understand that, it's easier to have these conversations, to say, yeah, Apple kind of sucks because of this, and Google kind of sucks because of this. You don't have to agree with everything one platform provides over somebody else's to lose a quote-unquote argument that is irrelevant to begin with. So that's the thing I hope people keep in mind. Nobody should want one platform to do everything better than another platform, because number one, better is relative. And number two, because we need the competition. The true conversation is how we as consumers can win. And that is exciting. That's what keeps me loving to talk about these types of experiences. I've always loved software. I've been a junkie from the first piece of software that I used, and that's never going to change. Now that these computers have gotten to the point where they are, and with two very successful market strategies competing in the same space, man, this is an exciting time. So I don't care. I genuinely do not care what you choose to use. What I do care about is finding really cool software for either computer. And, oh yeah, these aren't just phones. They're computers. They run real operating systems, they run real software, and they give me real experiences. These computers are more powerful than my computers were when I was growing up. Think about that. I know, your mind's blown. You got to start thinking about these things as computers. That doesn't mean they have to run exactly like a traditional computer has run, but let's just keep that conversation as clear as we can, like not really going into the whole personal attacks thing, because nothing can be gained from doing that. Ah, mine's better than the other. Ah, no, mine's better than the other. Ah, 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 ah.